you get these different focuses from things. But it's what's really beautiful is you can have a church in Africa where people take an hour or so to walk to church. In that context, a church service that runs for an hour is not really a very good idea, because you're not going to walk for an hour to go to church for an hour, turn around and then go home again another hour. Yeah. So you tend to have church services that are longer, they're more expressive often, and there's a lot of meals that take place there because people need to have a feed before they go home and stuff like that. Whereas in Sydney, if you have a church service that goes over for an hour, you see people looking at their watches, and because they only took 15 minutes to drive to church, and they're already thinking about what they're doing after church before the church service is even finished. And you see people walking out when a church service goes longer because they do have to. They've got something else to go to.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Absrober podcast, and it's great to have you along with us. My name is Joel, and I've got my two regular legendary co-hosts along with me, Tim and Stu. Welcome.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hello. Do you feel legendary today?
Yes.
Excellent. As you should. I wouldn't record if you didn't. So thank you for coming on.
Wow.
It's not very Australian, is it?
No.
I'm legendary.
Yes. We were just recording a Chip Lunch podcast with one of our people from Soul Revival, Aaron, and I like a bit of fake arrogance. You may have noticed. I just think it's really funny. Like Anchorman, Anchorman's one of my favorite. A lot of Will Ferrell comedies like that. And Erin gave me a few fake compliments, and she's like, "No, I've run out now. No more." Anyway, talking about fake compliments, maybe not. The King Charles,
yes,
has spoken in Congress. And Tim, you've listened to the whole thing.
I did, all on double speed. Didn't take very long.
Oh, very efficient of you.
Yeah.
How long was it?
It was 35 minutes.
Oh, it was 17 and a bit.
Or 17 and a bit.
Something, yeah.
And probably about 5 if you take away all the clapping that they do in Congress.
There is a lot of clapping.
There's a lot of clapping, yeah.
I feel like you get sore hands from all the clapping.
It's like American football, They need a bit of break from the action. They can't do it all in one hit.
Yeah.
But it's very explosive.
Stop and start.
Yeah.
Who stands up? Who sits down?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bit like church.
It can be. It is very liturgical. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I think you got Democrats and Republicans standing up too, I heard.
Yeah, there was some of it I was listening, not watching. Like I was kind of in and out of doing a few other mindless tasks. So I was listening to the whole thing. I wasn't actually watching the screen. A few times I was like, I wonder if everyone stood up for that one. I didn't go back and check. But the ones I did see, everyone was standing up. He didn't make too many partisan comments. And I guess this is where you're kind of going with this, in terms of the compliment, is he was very English. It was dignified, it was polite, it was self-deprecating. Like there was a lot of humour in there, and laughing at the awkwardness, I guess, of the British monarch being in American Congress. Given that 250 years ago there was the Revolutionary War, and they said, stuff yours, we want to go our own way.
Get out.
Yeah, and so there was a lot of, and obviously, there's been a lot of really rich, positive history since that time as well. But I was thinking about it. I don't think I've heard King Charles speak much. Like I don't think I've actually watched videos where he has done a lot of speaking, and so I'm so familiar to listening to Queen Elizabeth's voice, and I think I've got a good picture in my head of what she sounds like. And I realised that I don't actually have a lot of mental imagination of what King Charles sounds like until this week. So yeah, that was nice.
I thought it was just surprising. I didn't know, to be honest, I didn't even know he was going to do a speech, but it seemed like he had a bit of fun there as well. Stu, what was your reaction to it?
Yeah, the British do soft power really well. So in the midst of the President of the United States and the Prime Minister of England having some firm words to each other.
A bit of a stoush.
Yeah, a bit of a stoush. I think President Trump said of Starmer, he's no Winston Churchill, apparently. That was one of the puts downs that he gave him.
Okay.
And anyway, so yeah, it's a bit fractured, the relationship between the UK and the US, and they dispatch the king. And the king goes over there and he just bees the king. I think that's what was great about it. He didn't go to fix anything or do anything other than just to remind everybody about the relationship they had with each other. He had a funny comment that he actually went further back than the 250 years, Tim. In one of his talks, he talked about how there's a tradition in the English Parliament, or UK Parliament, where because Parliament arrested King Charles I when he went to Parliament, and then they had him executed, after they reinstated the monarchy, they had a tradition where they kept a member of the Parliament hostage every time the monarch went to speak at Parliament.
Yep.
So if they tried to take the monarch, then the palace could say, well, we've got one of your people, and they do a trade. And he said, but the problem with that tradition is we still do it. But when someone from Parliament comes to Buckingham Palace, we treat them so well and they have so much fun that it's pretty hard to get them to leave. So even little jokes like that were great. Yeah. He was very funny.
And he asked for volunteers from the Congress. He said, does anyone here want to go?
I missed that. Yeah. And then the other one that was funny was he said to, I don't know if it was Congress or the dinner he was having, but he said, I've noticed, Mr. President, on visiting the White House that you've done some renovations to the East Wing. They look fairly similar to the renovations we did to the White House in 1814. And that was when the British Army burnt down the White House. And everyone laughed. It's kind of fun. Yeah, it was good. But he was very good at trying to weave in a few important things that he wanted the president to take note of. That the president had been having a bit of a go that if it wasn't for America, then England would be speaking German. And he says, as I look at your map and see that you have names like Louisiana, it reminds me that if it wasn't for us, you'd be speaking French. So he was able to sort of, I think sort of in a soft way kind of de-escalate the situation between the two leaders. And in a way, like the Prime Minister isn't the leader of the UK, the King is. So in some ways, the King has a higher standing, I suppose, in Trump's eyes, I suppose, at least.
Yeah, it's interesting. You know more about this than I do. The idea of the constitutional monarchy and who is running the country, who actually has the more power, day to day, figurehead, like what does that all kind of look like? And so the king's, as you say, the soft power, but also the regalness that comes from having the king. I think was actually a really nice. He was able to strike that tone that he's not leading Parliament, day to day. That's not his role. So, have your stoush with, the Prime Minister if you like, but let me set this agenda. And I thought he did it really well. And again, it's well known, one of the sticking points is NATO and different perceptions of the value of that and outsized influence. And again, just in a not combative way, but just being King Charles really positive, recording the history of their alliances, again, like way back before the Revolutionary War, afterwards, during the World Wars, and up into the present, which, it wasn't really an attack back at Trump. It was just really positive with a smile on his face and a lovely bit of British regalness and humour, just to say, we're really good friends. Let's keep being really good friends. Which didn't really address the issue, and that's not what he was there for. But it just kind of rises in the consciousness of everyone, like, this is important. The fact that our nations have a lot of history, shared language, political systems, values, beliefs, and that's let's not be too quick to throw that away. Was a sort of that soft power what he was doing there.
And I fully understand my friends who are Republicans, but what I do like about monarchy is the King is a check on Parliament's power, and the Parliament is a check on the King's power. And so I love checks and balances. So I think the Westminster system is just one example. There are other ones, but I like the Westminster system that there's multiple houses that also have checks and balances that we have in our Australian system too, with the Senate and the lower house. And there's not just one person who's in charge. And I think the American presidential system, you can have someone who's a business person who hasn't even spent heaps of time in politics all of a sudden being elected to president, and that brings some positives and some not so positives. But then having someone who was brought up to be a king and actually lived his whole life waiting for that moment, then when he does have that moment, there's a consistency and there's a stability to it that I think I like. I liked how he said, yes, I've been watching with interest the Moon project with Artemis II, I think you call it. We would call it in the UK Artemis II. Just little things like that, really funny. And then he said, if you're talking about colonising the moon, you might want to check that it's not part of the Commonwealth already first, though. So that was a little jibe as well. You may be powerful, but number one, your power doesn't last forever. Like our power didn't last forever. And, you may be powerful, but the UK has been very powerful as well. So there's all those sort of checks. And it was interesting seeing that cross-Atlantic check on the president in a little way. Maybe I'm reading too much into that, but his respect for the monarchy. I think he said something like he was watching the coronation of the Queen in the 50s, sitting on his mother's knee, and he said something like,
"If Mum,
Trump,
right.
sorry, yeah," and he said, "If Mum could see me today with the King of England," and then he gave him a bell from a submarine that fought in the Pacific called the HMS Trump, which I thought was a delightful gift to give him because it was named Trump, but also a reminder, actually, not only have we contributed to causes that you've been involved with, but here's a practical thing that you can look at and remember that it's not just America that's keeping the world safe. There's a few of us that are working together. Let's try and keep working together. So I thought that was interesting.
Apparently when he gave him the bell, he said, "You shouldn't ever need to get hold of us. Just give us a ring."
Oh, did he?
Yes, that's right.
That's right. You ever need us, give us a ring. Which is the whole issue, right? Like, so he's arguing that Starmer hasn't wanted to come and help until the war's over. And so, that's just a particular political position that will change government to government. But the King's there as a consistent reminder that there's a friendship there, that they have the same language and the same heritage and all that. Yeah.
It's kind of seemed what was clever about it was that it reset the agenda in a sense of just there's maybe some political backbiting and getting stuck into each other, like you're saying. But the way that he's used the humour, but also recalling like the partnerships that we've had before, it's just so fascinating how speeches have this power to be able to do that. There's so many examples of that over time.
That's a good point.
You mentioned Churchill just before, like the speeches he would give to the British people, for example. It's really fascinating how you can, it's like public speaking like that can change the perceptions or even the directions of geopolitical discourse. I think that's so fascinating.
It is interesting.
I don't know where I can take it. Like you probably know more about that than me, Stu, but I think that's so, you can listen to, people reference Eisenhower's speech about the military-industrial complex still today, and that was when he was on his way out of his presidency, for example. Anything you would on that? I know you'd like that.
Just something really quickly. It was really interesting that he mentioned Winston Churchill's first visit to America, because Winston was half American, half English, because his mother was American, and he was saying there's a synergy between the president, because his mother was Scottish and his father was American. But he told a funny story. He said that Eisenhower walked into Churchill's apartment just as Churchill was getting out of the bath, and this is a very famous story. So apparently he was in his birthday suit in the nude as he was walking across the room, and just so happens the President of the United States walks in on him, and instead of getting embarrassed, Churchill apparently said, "The Prime Minister of Great Britain has nothing to hide from the President of the United States." And I can't remember the joke that Charles said, but he riffed off that, didn't he?
Then he said something about, my dear mother had the pleasure of meeting many US presidents, none of them in a state of undress or something.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, he did, didn't he? But then again, see, that's that reminder, that soft power. Like my mother met 50 presidents.
Whatever
or something.
it
It wasn't 50,
yeah.
but it was so many prime ministers. She had more prime ministers under her. But I don't know. I like that. But I liked it how I was wondering where Charles would go. I'm not even going to get into what I think about Charles compared to the Queen, but I did like his lack of hubris. And I thought, it reminded me of something my dad said once. He said, if you can play football, you don't need to tell anyone. You just play football and everyone knows you're good at it. So Ronaldo never big notes himself or talks a big game. And I think Charles is in that ilk. He's just like, I am the king, actually. That's kind of who I am. And I can just speak in a non-anxious way about that, which I found quite interesting.
It was also, he spoke far more, again, as I said, I haven't heard him speak a lot, but he spoke very positively about Christianity and his own faith as well, which was really interesting. So he talked about For many here and for myself, the Christian faith is a firm anchor and daily inspiration that guides us not only personally, together as members of a community. He talked about, I'm mindful that we are still in the season of Easter, the season that most strengthens my hope. It is why I believe with all my heart that the essence of our two nations is a generosity of spirit and duty to foster compassion, to promote peace, to deepen mutual understanding, to value all people and of all faiths and of none. So it was really interesting to hear him reflect on that. Again, Queen Elizabeth was very famous for her faith and very public, particularly, I suppose in her later decade and a half of Christmas and Easter messages that she would do. She would be very, very public about her faith. She would name Jesus Christ very specifically as the anchor of her faith. I read other people's commentary on this questioning of, does Charles have the same faith as his mother, and is he, a bit more wishy-washy in his understanding of who Jesus is and what Christianity is, and all these kinds of things. And so, and again, there's always an element of public performance to his to any speech, particularly in these kind of really significant ones. But it was really interesting for him to name that and to name his faith in that way. So I thought that was curious as well. Yeah,
because he got a bit of grief this Easter because he didn't give an Easter talk, but he gave an Eid talk. So there was a lot of controversy in the UK about that. He did, when he came to the throne, he used to talk about it. I don't know what ended up happening in the wash-up, but he wanted to see himself as the defender of the faiths, not the faith. So there's
defender
a lot
of faith, like
faith,
to lose
the faiths,
plural.
Oh yes, yeah. So because the sovereign should be the defender of the faith, meaning Protestant
really Christianity, actually, Church of England.
And yes, he wanted to, I think it was remove the, so defender of faith, generally, very broadly, of just like any or none. Yeah, that kind of idea of, Yeah,
he's probably come to say that. But I heard speeches of him years ago where he still had the defender of the faiths, but he definitely seems similar idea because he had the plural.
Broader than...
Yeah, so all the faiths and now maybe he's saying faith in itself, so that's interesting. It's a different nuance again too. That's interesting. But yeah, he's definitely different to his mother in that, and his son William apparently has publicly said he doesn't have a faith. So, although he's started to change that recently, so I don't know. It's interesting, something to pray about.
So what I suppose it kind of highlights is there are different ways of doing things, and in a sense of that kind of not similar to Charles in terms of resetting the agenda, but we thought it'd be worth talking about how this kind of looks like in the church context, and in terms of kind of project management and how we're kind of organising ourselves around church. I think sometimes we've spoken about before, and we can delve into the detail here. And Stu, this was your idea, so I might let you go first on this, but there can be a debate over just numbers of the church, and should we just be driven purely by metrics in terms of growth, how many numbers of people are coming to church, or are there other things? And it's also some approaches kind of see church as like a business project, and I would say that we probably differ in that. But why did you think this was a good idea to talk about today? Is it something that's been on your mind, or is it something that you've just been thinking about recently, or is it? Do you have an actual example that you want to lay out?
Yeah, I thought it was fun to talk about the King's speeches because it was surprising to everyone the amount of humour he used. I think it was kind of enjoyable. I encourage everyone to have a quick look. There's some quick summaries of his speeches if you don't want to listen to the whole thing. But yeah, it was quite funny actually. I was surprised he was that funny. Even though I'm a bit more familiar with his speeches, that was pretty funny. The other thing is just the two different systems, even though they're both democracies, they're both run very differently. The United States and the UK with a constitutional monarchy or a presidential system. And so, how do you manage things? There's different ways to run a democracy, and there's different ways to run a local church too. And the great thing about the New Testament is there's no prescribed way to run church. There's principles, and there's obviously the gospel as a whole, and it's the lordship of Christ that shapes what we do. And he is building the church, and we are partnering with him. So all the ecclesial language in the scriptures always has Jesus at the centre of church. But he gives us this wonderful flexibility that we can apply church strategy differently in different contexts. So one of the successes of the Christian movement is that it can be applied so differently in different contexts. So the same message, the same Lord, same Spirit, same Heavenly Father, but yet we can come to the way we gather around Jesus can look differently. Now, it's important we always gather around Jesus, and as Protestants, Reformed evangelicals, we see it's really important to gather around the Word of God and to put that at the centre of our meetings. And so that's obviously really important. But then when it comes to actually how we organise church and how we manage it and how we do rosters or how we organise our different ministries, there's heaps of flexibility, and it's so creative actually. I delight in the creativity of it. But thinking about project management in church, it's good every now and again just to pause and think of the real practicalities of how do we run our churches and how do we run our ministries, and what are some good ideas that people have found to make things easier. But then as we talk about project management, inevitably there's going to be debates around the theology of different management techniques as well. So some people are looking for efficiency and they're trying to make the running of a church very efficient. Some people are trying to look for church to be run very relationally, so they're even allowing for less efficient structures in order that there's a relationality to it. There's other people that are really keen on the church being so focused on mission that we're really spending as least amount of time as possible organising the church so that we can be putting all our investment into the mission and evangelism. And others are saying, well, really good, strong discipleship is going to lead to good evangelism. So you get these different focuses from things, but it's what's really beautiful is you can have a church in Africa where people take an hour or so to walk to church. In that context, a church service that runs for an hour is not really a very good idea, because you're not going to walk for an hour to go to church for an hour, turn around and then go home again another hour. Yeah. So you tend to have church services that are longer, they're more expressive often, and there's a lot of meals that take place there because people need to have a feed before they go home and stuff like that. Whereas in Sydney, if you have a church service that goes over for an hour, you see people looking at their watches, and because they only took 15 minutes to drive to church, and they're already thinking about what they're doing after church before church service is even finished. And you see people walking out when a church service goes longer because they do have to. They've got something else to go to. Many of our churches organise our Sundays around 15 minutes of a coffee and a biscuit so that we don't put any burden on people. So that context wouldn't work in Africa, but it does work in Sydney. So this is what's so fun about this idea, that depending on what your theology and your strategy is will determine your practice. And I kind of think that project management for the church comes out of your theology and your strategy. So depending on your context where you are, your strategy will be a bit different, like in Africa or Sydney. And then, your theology is going to bind certain principles to whatever context you're in. So your project management is around, well, most churches think singing is really important. So how do you do that? Some churches are purely congregational singing. There's nobody up the front almost leading it. It's just everyone singing. Some, there's this, you can't even hear the congregation sing because the band's so loud and the light show's so big. So there are different approaches to that. Now, if you have an approach where there's a very professional musical experience that you're coming to take part in, the project management of that will obviously take up a lot of your time. And so there's a lot of practical things that determine what you focus your project management on. But whether you're doing any of those strategies, one of the things that is worth talking about today too, a bit later on, is many of us get caught up in the detail of the urgent and we miss the important. So we will be working in the ministry often to organise the rosters for the weekend, and whether it's a morning tea or it's a breakfast, as we have, we slow down a bit and actually do spend more time with each other, even though we're in a city in our model. However, there's so much going on and people have stuff going on in their lives that you can go week to week without thinking too much about working on the ministry. And so I think project management, to talk about that every now and again, it sounds a bit businessy. You might have a different word for it. It could be ministry management or whatever it is. But I suppose today is just a good opportunity to think through what does it look like when you think about what goals you have. You can actually work in the ministry but also on the ministry as well. So coming back to that original thing where you were saying there's a bit of a debate between people who are talking about, more metrics, and others who are just saying, oh, that's not very biblical and spiritual to talk about numbers. There is a debate going on in some circles where some people are saying, well, actually, metrics is really important to the kingdom. Jesus is saying, go and make disciples of all nations. It is important to know that we are seeing people come into the kingdom. And I can't remember all the details of that particular position off the top of my head, but there are particular metrics that some people have linked with certain New Testament teachings on the harvest. Actually, the harvest, I think, is one of the things people refer to. A harvest is something that's you can count. Like, did you have a big harvest or a small harvest? So there is a spiritualized view of metrics amongst some people, but some people see metrics as a business acumen that might take us away from a spirituality. Well, with Soul Revival, as we are with so many things, we're not either one extreme or the other. We do have a fairly holistic approach where we're looking at metrics as part of what we do, but it's not the whole measure of the ministry either. So in our staff meetings each week, we have 2 meetings. We have what we call a double-up meeting or a meeting to work on the ministry, because we're seeking to double up our structures and double up our capacity in case Jesus grows us, because it's Jesus who grows the church, not our man-made structures and events and strategies that result in spiritual growth. It's actually, if people are converted, it's through hearing the word of God, and it's through the Holy Spirit that convicts them of that. People are discipled in community as we teach young people how to read the Bible for themselves, and we help each other to carry one another's burdens, as Galatians 6 talks about. So we are, in our view, we are partnering with Jesus as he grows the church. So we see part of our role is to if Jesus is changing everything and he's the one growing the church, we partner with him by telling the truth and love of sharing the truth and love of Jesus. And so what we talk about in our project management is, what does that practically look like? Well, we work out how can we increase our capacity to disciple people if God does bring more people, and how do we reach out to people in mission so that they know the good news about the kingdom. So when we think about project management, our goal orientation is, if Jesus is going to grow us, why don't we build our structures and let's see what happens, rather than if we do X, Y, Z, that will be deterministic and it will result in growth. So the other, I suppose, parallel view to that would be some people who say, just preach the gospel and the rest will happen. I suppose we're in between those two areas. So, yeah, that's kind of a bit of a summary of the topic for me.
Yeah, I suppose the ultimate factor is that Jesus is going to grow the church. And what I hear you saying is that, how can we be prepared for him to do that? Tim, I'd be interested in your perspective on that.
Which he may or may not do. Too,
right. And that we can just be ready for...
But we're ready if Jesus
way.
does grow us. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry,
exactly.
Tim. Yeah. Go.
No. I think that's bad. I think that's a really important distinction to make, because if you're doing what you said, if you just make it about metrics and then say, if we do X, Y, and Z, then we could be in danger of almost minimising Jesus' role in the growth. And
I just want to be fair to people who are really strong on metrics. They wouldn't be saying that we're minimising Jesus, but we are. I suppose the nuance is, rather than our plans driving growth, we wouldn't say things like we are going to double up the church. We're just saying, if God did grow our church and even double it, what would that look like for our existing structures? Would we burn out trying to help everyone, or have we included enough people into our ministry team so that we have more people to serve more people? That's more about the angle. So I use the word deterministic, and I'm not saying people who are into metrics are deterministic, but we're definitely not saying if we do this, then that will happen. Now, having said that, the Bible says if Jesus sent out the 72 and to preach the gospel, prepare the way, and he said some people will take you in, some people won't. Dust the dirt off your feet and go on to the next town if people don't listen. So there wasn't, even in Jesus' strategy of sending out the 72, that didn't mean that every time they went to a town, people would become Christians. Some whole towns rejected Jesus. Capernaum, for example, he condemned them. He said, if the wonders that were done amongst you were done in Sodom and Gomorrah, they would have repented. So that's a pretty hard-hearted town, his own backyard there in Capernaum. So I just want to make that point, that as we talk about project management and as we trying to work about ways to help us to do our ministry, we are still sitting under the authority of the Lord as he goes before us.
And perhaps maybe it's an important distinction that I think it is important that you make it, is that allowing almost like business acumen or business strategy to come first, rather than allow Jesus to do it. And you have to be aware of like, where are you actually allowing the growth to come from?
And again, I don't want to label any particular position as not letting Jesus, grow the church. But I just think it's good at the outset to say, just to share our conviction that, you can run scripture in schools and you can run it really effectively and you can get the best people in there, but will that lead to gospel fruit or evangelistic outcomes? Maybe not. I've lived through both and will do again. So at the moment, our church is going through a period of growth, but I've gone through periods where soul revival has declined more than it's grown as well. So I suppose there's just that important moment to just pause and go, we're humbly going to be waiting on the Lord and praying that he actually takes our acts of faith and he uses us. He doesn't need us. He can do it all himself, but he chooses to use us. And so it's kind of nice in our project management to do that. I was in a planning day years and years ago at a church, and there was someone who was saying the more efficient we are, the more the church will grow. And then someone said, actually, the more spiritual we are, the more the church will grow. And then these two people were arguing with each other about whether we should be having prayer nights or nights to organise the structure of our teams better. And then I remember the minister got up and he said, why don't we try and do both? Why don't we pray and organise ourselves? And those two people went, oh, yeah. And I think that's where I'm coming from in that comment.
Yeah, cool. Tim, is there anything there that Stu has elaborated on that kind of resonates with you, or you think, I'm not so sure about that?
Oh, for sure. And I think just drawing on some threads that I know that we've talked about on the podcast in previous episodes come up every now and then. So one is I'm thinking about, here's my two threads. One is we've talked a lot about Andy Crouch's different postures towards culture. So condemning or critiquing, copying or consuming, those kind of ones. And he's saying all of those are insufficient. You should be creating culture. So that's one thread. The other thread I want to pull into the conversation is the Marshall McLuhan idea of the medium is the message, or sometimes the metaphor is the message. So if we use business management as our metaphor, or if we use sort of industrialized metaphors, they're not value neutral. And some of the dangers that we can get to, and Stu's been flagging this with the sort of the caution around some of our businessy type language, is, we don't want to see Christians as a product that we're producing, like it kind of depersonalizes it. And again, using an industrialized metaphor can sometimes take us off onto the wrong track. And same with using a lot of businessy, corporate type metaphors and systems, and just pulling, copying, consuming, using Crouch's language, these kind of very corporate languages and metaphors can sometimes distort what we're actually trying to do. And it's why I'm often cautious about those kinds of metaphors. I don't think we have to use organic type metaphors just because Jesus in an agrarian pre-industrialized society was using agrarian type metaphors. So I don't think there's an oughtness there, but I do think it's significant that your metaphor does shape the way you think about what you're doing. And the power of more organic metaphors like farming metaphors, or when we started the church, we talked a lot about trellis and vine, which is another, again, is an organic type thing, is it provides space for what you've just said about, God may bless the harvest, he may not. I can do work as a farmer or as a gardener, or backyard gardener, just putting my pot plants together. And sometimes the plants work and sometimes they don't. It's good for me to get good at growing this plant, if that's a passion of mine. If I want to grow a tomato plant, it's good for me to invest in how to grow good tomatoes. I've got a good mate I used to work with at YouthWorks, Matt Bartlett. He grows lots of really good things, but he's got this chili plant that he's growing. And he's put a lot of time and effort and thought into how to make good chilies, but sometimes the harvest works and sometimes it doesn't. And so that's, I think the the power of the organic metaphors are that it allows that space for God is the one who causes growth. And so Paul talks about this in 1 Corinthians, so-and-so planted the seed, so-and-so watered, someone else cultivated, but it's God who causes the growth. And so I think about those verses where I think it's in Psalms, and I think James comes to it as well, but that idea that we can plan, but unless God is with us in our plans, they'll come to nothing. So it's good to plan. It's good to be strategic and thinking and purposeful, equip others to do ministry and all of those kinds of things, recognising that it's not, it's frame it positively, it is always something that we do with God relationally and organically, not just corporately and finding the right system that works. And that's the other danger. I'll flag one more thing and then you can ask another question. The other thing is when we overuse corporate systems, you can end up running a church without inviting God into that. So secular systems management works completely without God because they've figured out something about the way that typically good businesses will do these types of things. So I can do all these kind of things, and you end up running an atheistic business that has no interest in God, but can be quite successful if you follow these kind of steps. The danger of a depersonalized, non-relational project management type things is we can end up doing really good project management in our churches and completely forget to invite God into that conversation because we've got the system that works. It's the same way that spiritual disciplines can sometimes get off track. It's like, okay, if I just read and meditate and pray and do silence and go to church, I'll grow as a Christian. I can do all of those, weirdly, I can do all of those things actually without God. And so even our spiritual disciplines can be weirdly atheistic. And so it just always coming back to, even when we get into the nitty-gritty of how am I going to project manage, how am I going to assess, how am I going to, under God grow this ministry, always remembering that it's relationally with God. So I think those kind of things are helpful things to draw into the conversation.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I think it's important that we've articulated it that way because, it's the most important thing to be wary of, or at least aware of, is that are you putting plans together or just even running the church, is that how are we doing this for God? I think that's really important. Stu, though, your many years of ministry experience, are there any other things that you think church leaders should be wary of in terms of that kind of project management or organising things?
I think a good way to summarise that is I think churches are organised messiness. So I think it's good to organise, and it's good to try and love your congregation by having a lot of known things that they can rely on as things that are going to be happening. So I think it's good to have services that I actually really like a structured church service, actually. Some of my friends don't like it as much as I do, but I think a very simple service with a simple outline with the key ingredients in the church service is really good. I think a service in our area that goes for about an hour is really good, because then we can have a formal time for an hour and then we can have some extended informal time around that, where we're not just relating to each other symbolically, but we're actually relating to each other and putting into practice what we're learning in the church, and trying to build a culture that's not just about a second job, where we're running the church as our second job, but we're actually hanging out and we're actually having social time together. And I think a lot of people don't see church as a time to relax with each other and enjoy each other's company. I think it's more about how organised and strong it is.
And efficient.
Yeah, and efficient. I think efficiency for me is not an ultimate goal. It's our goal of some parts of what we do. But then when messiness occurs, I have a low expectation on how organised we have to be. So I'm not disappointed if something goes wrong and a guitar G string breaks in the... Oh, that's a funny one to break. The D string breaks on the guitar. The D string breaks on a guitar, and all of a sudden the guitarist just either keeps playing with it not sounding exactly right, or just says, "Oh, hang on a sec, I'll just fix that," or something.
Yeah, that's okay. Had that happen before.
It's
kind of nice
okay
when everyone just welcomes it.
Yeah, or if there's a new trainee preacher that's still learning, and maybe they go on a bit long or not quite a great sermon. It's not like I'm going to get outraged by that. So now again, there's other senior ministers that have different approaches. They want to have a copy of the new preacher's sermon before they preach it, and they want to be able to go through it with them, and that's part of training too. It's another way of training. Yeah. I like to train someone by saying, watch what I do, I'll help you produce a sermon, and then have a crack, give it a go. So some people find that a bit dangerous, but I mean, I wouldn't put someone up that's going to preach heresy, but if they're not great with their delivery or whatever, I'm okay with that, because you'll learn by doing, you see. Yeah. But then also when there's disruption in the church, I think we had a podcast a while ago about the fact that conflict in the church can even be healthy, whereas sometimes conflict gets in the way of efficiency for some people. The other one is sometimes people will ask me as a senior minister, how are you going? Because they are actually concerned about how I'm going. But I also know that some people ask me, how are you going? Because if I'm not going well, they're worried then the church won't be run properly, and then the church might fall over. So when people are saying, you make sure you look after yourself, or, you know, hope you're not taking on too much, or I hope you're delegating well, they're sort of possibly just about how I'm going, or it could be just about make sure the church is being run efficiently. So I think those things are good. Like, it's good to make sure we're doing things efficiently, but I see some people getting quite frustrated at church because they have an over-realised eschatology of what church should be. And what I mean by that is when we get to heaven, our eschatological vision for the future is the most wonderful church, the best church, without sin. However, we're in a church that's a hospital, and we're actually, it's funny, isn't it? Like, we're saying to everyone, we want everyone to come to our church. So whoever you are, whatever your background, with, you know, obviously within safe reasons, like we have safety protocols and safe ministry and all that sort of stuff, but we're just asking people we don't know to come and think about hearing the gospel and putting their faith in Jesus and joining our community. So you get all sorts of people, and sometimes it takes a while for those people to gel. So an over-realised eschatology is expecting the church to be more than it can be. But if we expect it to be less than it can be too, that's not good either. I don't think it's good for people to say, if we have music, we have music. If we don't, we don't. I don't think that's God-honouring either. Or, look, no, that guy can't preach very well, but, you know, throw him up, doesn't really matter. You know, that's not good either. But what I like is, so not an over-realised eschatology or an under-realised eschatology, because we burn out with an over-realised eschatology because we work so hard to try and fill the gaps and there can't be any messiness. Or we can be a bit lazy if we don't invest our talents and we just sit back and say, we don't have to really work that hard on project management because God's going to do what he's going to do. But in the middle, there's a realised eschatology where we're saying, well, let's try and be the people of God today, and God's put us in this place at this time, and he's given us brains, and he's given us a prayerful dependence on him. So let's try and work this out. Let's try and work really hard at this.
And the messiness comes from the fact that it's relational. And I think that's really key, that we are relational with each other, but also God is relational. Like he's a person. And I think this is where sometimes that industrialized idea and those corporate metaphors can sometimes treat God as, you know, he's the vending machine. Like, if I punch these buttons, if I do this type of process, if I set this ministry up this way, if I get my language down this neatly, it's a guaranteed outcome that this will happen. And just remembering that God is relational and he's free to do whatever he wants, and that we are relational, just allows us to, again, not be intentionally bad, like as she was saying, like, we're not going to be intentionally inefficient, but we're going to just sit with the messiness and realise that actually what God wants us to do is to sit in with people and be relational. I know we talked about the Knives Out movie when it first came out, the Knives Out 3, Wake Up Dead Man, which is about these Catholic priests. This is going to make sense. There's this young priest who's in the movie, and he's in the middle of investigating this murder. He's one of the key suspects. So it's all high paced. He's involved. He's working with a detective. And then in the middle of the movie, he gets this phone call. Well, no, he calls up someone he doesn't really know. And all of a sudden she starts sharing a really hard life. And he says to the detective, just hold on a moment. And he walks out of the room. And the next kind of couple of minutes is the detective looking to himself around the office going, what on earth is he doing? And he keeps looking at the clock and time keeps going by, and he opens the door and he looks out and there's the priest on his knees, still on the phone, praying for this person. And it was this beautiful picture of something really important is going on that needs his attention right now, which is this murder investigation and the fact that he might be a suspect and he's working with it. But actually the messiness of ministry is you also sit relationally with people in the moment and what you need. And sometimes that's a sin issue, that it's, you're dealing with someone's active sin or the sin that's been done to them, or just the fallenness of the world, and you're comforting people in the sickness and sadness of things in life. And sometimes it's just it's not sinful, it's just that we're humans. And part of our humanness is we are finite and we can't do everything, and we are, being tired is not sinful. Being tired is part of our God-given finitude, and people in our congregations will be tired, and that's okay. But so we have all these, and we'll be tired times. So there's just remembering that it's relational, I think, is just really, really key, and remembering that God is relational, and that He's engaging with us relationally, He's engaging with our parishioners relationally, and sometimes He is inefficient. Like I'm not convinced that efficiency is a godly value, or a characteristic of God. And I've said this before, but I remember a little editorial, I think by Tony Payne, it may not be, but that's my memory, where he talks about how ridiculous the Good Shepherd is for leaving 99 to go find the one. He's like, 99% is a really good score. If you turn up the next day with 99% of your sheep, you've done really, really well. Churches would be stoked if they ended up with 99% attrition rate. They only lost 1% of their congregation over the year. That'd be amazing. He goes, but that's not how God works. Actually, the heart of Jesus and the heart of the Father is to go after the one, which doesn't make any sense if we've got industrialized and corporate metaphors. But it does totally make sense if you've got relational metaphors of every single soul is precious to Jesus, and every single soul is worth our time and attention.
That's interesting. I was even just thinking, Stu, you were talking about putting someone up to preach, for example. But I feel like for you especially, and how we would always aspirationally want to do church, is that you would have a relationship with that person that you're putting up for the first time to preach. So you would know at least theologically where they're at. And you don't know maybe how well they'll do up the front, but they're the things that don't matter. But those are the things that matter, and you only have that because you have that relationship with them, I think. So I was going to ask you then, is that what we should be aiming for in terms of the project management side of things? Is it a high priority or a high aim after we say we put God first? Is it relationships? Is that the thing that we should think about most?
I think it's a big part of it. I mentioned the difference between an African context and a Sydney context, city context. Well, it's not as pronounced, but it's similar between country churches and city churches sometimes. And I've got a really good mate, Isaac Gordon, who's an Aboriginal pastor up in Brewarrina. And when we go to church in Brewarrina, the church services last a lot longer. There's a lot more people who get invited up to get to say stuff and
off the cuff too.
And sometimes it doesn't start exactly when it was going to start, and sometimes it goes longer, and there's always a feed afterwards. So it is very relational. It's not very. There's not a lot of focus on being efficient and formal. So not that there aren't formal parts, and Isaac is really efficient in his ministry, but the sermons can go for a lot longer than they do down in Sydney. So it's a bit more of that kind of juxtaposition between the city and the African context. Anyway, I saw it when I asked Isaac to come once down to Sydney to not only preach but also to lead a service. Because I remember when I was at another church and the guest speaker would be brought in, and then they'd be interviewed for 5 minutes, and then the minister would say, this is exactly how much time you've got to run. And I just thought it'd be fun when Isaac came to not only get him to preach and interview him, but actually get him to run the service. I thought that'd be really fun. So it was supposed to start, and this is no negative to Isaac. He actually was in traffic coming all the way from Parramatta, and so he was coming over from Parramatta because he was staying there. Anyway, he was late. He was probably about half an hour late, and it was funny as, like, the service is supposed to start, and there's all these people going, and this is a pejorative Anglo middle class church in a Sydney suburb, and they're like, well, church is supposed to start. 5 minutes, okay, people are cool with that. Then 15 minutes, people are starting to get a bit. And then after 20 or 30 minutes, people are coming up to me going, well, what's going to happen? You know, I've got things to do after this. And, you know, are you going to start this church service? I'm here. And I thought it was interesting because the people were translating that as a sign of, not that they're saying Isaac disrespected them, but it's a sign of disrespect not to be running on time, because you respect people who have made the effort to come on time, to start on time, you see, in our culture, I think. That's my interpretation. And Isaac wasn't disrespecting people. He was just running on a different kind of methodology, different strategy, different framework. So anyway, he came in, he was about 45 minutes late. But then he came in, he wasn't flustered, just came in and he got his guitar and he went up the front and he started singing a song, and we just tried to find it on our Proclaim, and it was an old hymn, and we all started singing along with him, and then we sang another song, and it wasn't structured. There wasn't the welcome and the da-da-da-da-da. And you could see people slowly starting to relax. Now, some people left. Some people left on the hour because that was the hour up, right? But when it got to, after we sang a few songs, Isaac said, "Oh, Brother Brad, do you want to get up and tell us, share a word?" And then Brad would get up and share a word. And then, "Brother Stu, do you want to share something?" And I'd share something. And people were like, "What's going on here?" But it was kind of nice to be thrown into that different context. Now, I would do that every week in Sydney, but I think a lot of people went away with that saying it was different, but it was really good. And so there isn't just one way to do things. There is lots of different ways to do things. But when it comes to projects in church and about the relationality, because we're friends with Ike and we have been for 20 years, there's that trust. And I know his character, and I know that he's convicted that Jesus is Lord. And I know he's very competent as a pastor. He just does it differently. So that old CMS adage of if you know someone's got good character and they're convicted that Jesus is Lord, they can learn how to do stuff. But if they don't have a good character, it's very hard to learn how to have a good character. Or if you don't have a conviction that Jesus is Lord, we can't work together. So those two things, like you said. So when it comes to a group of Christians, this is just a couple of things on project management. Like, no matter what the church context, it could be launching a new congregation, it could be running a mission series or an evangelistic course as the project we're running, or it could be refurbishing the building or starting a new youth group or a kids ministry or running an event like Easter or Christmas. Some things that we need to take into account as we try and plan is, unlike business projects, we're working with volunteers, not staff. We have spiritual outcomes, not just measurable mathematical data. We're not trying to make a profit, but we are trying to make sure that we use a good stewardship of the resources that people under God have provided. And there's a changing availability amongst people that needs to be taken into account. However, people can't presume on our good nature with that. There's also reality that you've got to do what you say you're going to do as well. And there's also variability in energy levels. So all those relational dynamics that you were talking about there come into account. And I think a lot of it can be summarised by grace. So when we're talking about people or vision or momentum, we need to have an element of grace all the time, I think. Because when you have grace, then I'm running a meeting, and if someone doesn't come to the meeting, I'm assuming they had something better to do than be there. And I've kind of I've learnt that a lot from Isaac, actually, because if there's a funeral, Isaac will go and do the funeral, because that's more important than seeing me. Even if he had an appointment to see me, he'll do the funeral. Now, I'm the chaplain at Cronulla Sharks NRL, and some of the NRL wellbeing teams talk about how over the last decade or so, clubs have understood the importance of funerals to players. Because in the early days of having Indigenous players in clubs, there was an expectation, well, we pay you, not that we own you, but we kind of own your time.
We're under contract?
You're under contract. You're here to do this for us because we're paying you for that. But in their community, if an auntie dies and they don't turn up to that funeral, that is a huge moment of disrespect that is more important than even playing the game on the weekend. It's more important than my job, that if my auntie passes away, I need to go to the funeral. So people would disparagingly say, oh, Aboriginal people are unreliable. They can just go at a moment's notice. But that's a lack of grace, I think. Now, from a business point of view, and I've only had work outside of the church for only a few years of my life, really. So, it could be more complex. And I'd love to hear if any of our listeners or viewers want to push back on me on this. But I love how the NRL now give Aboriginal players the opportunity to go to a funeral, and no one even bats an eyelid. There's no expectation of explanation or why aren't you playing this weekend? It's like, yeah, of course. So I suppose in our culture, the parallel would be if someone has a child, or if someone loses a father or a mother. But in Aboriginal culture, like if a cousin dies, that's a big deal. And I've had the privilege of being to some Aboriginal funerals that Isaac's run, and they're huge events. There's so much respect given, and that's where the community gathers. So, yeah, I think sometimes in churches, particularly as a senior pastor, I think I am tempted to forget that this isn't the only thing that's happening in people's lives. And so it's good to be reminded that if someone's not at my meeting, it could be because they have something more important to do. So if you build that in, for example, and you express that to the rest of the team, the person who's put a big effort on being there and feels disrespected by the fact that someone else hasn't come to organise Easter, this is a really important Easter meeting, we've got to get it done. If they haven't turned up, don't necessarily go straight to they've disrespected me and they've let me down. Now, the flip side of that is they may have disrespected and let down. And particularly if someone just is laissez-faire and they don't care and they never turn up, then yeah, that's where I will say, I don't know if you want to be on the team, really. Like, do you want to do this? Because you don't seem to be able to do it. And so it's that middle ground. It's not one extreme or the other. But I think when you start with relationship, and we think, we've been forgiven everything. We've got to continually forgive each other when we let each other down. And sometimes someone is unwell or whatever. So the way we've kind of structured that into our project management of our teams with the leadership level is we have a thing called ministry slide. So if someone comes into a ministry and they miss a meeting, it's not the end of the world. I don't make a big deal of it. If someone doesn't come to a number of meetings and I sit down with them and they say, I'm having a bit of a hard time, I don't always do this well, but I carefully say, you are more important to us than the team. You being in the team is about being friends with you as well as what we achieve. So it's not actually the project we're managing. It's actually it's us carrying each other's burdens by being in a friendship group that is on mission together that's more important. So if you want to actually have a break from coming to the meetings for a while but stay on the team, I'm cool with that. However, if that lasts a long time, we have a thing called ministry slide where we say, look, you have been ministering in this team for a while on the sound desk, but it doesn't seem like that's easy for you at the moment. Would you like to slide into another ministry? And sometimes people go, yeah, I might try another ministry for a while. Or they say, I might just slide out of ministry for a while because I've got some stuff I'm working on and I can slide in again later. So that means that we're not actually project managing events at the church. The project management is to facilitate our ministry together and have it as organised as we can. And the bigger the church gets, the more you need to do that. But at the same time, having that relational space saying, we're actually doing two things when we come to a meeting. We're coming to be friends with each other, support each other, pray for each other, carry one another's burdens, and plan this event. Now, some people that's jarring. They don't want to have fun in a meeting, for example. Look, leave that to social time. Leave the spiritual nurture of carrying each other's burdens to the Bible study, and then we'll do this meeting and we'll be efficient and we'll get that done because I'm a busy person. So I think in the city, we like to compartmentalize our Christianity into the business time, into the fun time, and into the spiritual time, and then the church time. And if the singer is lousy at the front of church, I'm going to go and complain to the minister and say, what are you going to do about that? Because I'm embarrassed. I'm not going to bring any of my friends to church because it's so terrible and geeky or whatever. So, yeah, I just think having a bit more of a relaxed attitude towards project management, seeing people as volunteering their time when they have other stuff in their lives is a good starting point.
Yeah. Anything to add to the relational aspect of thinking about how we organise ourselves, Tim?
No, it was good. Yeah, I don't have
There was quite a lot in there. It was very effective, very helpful, very comprehensive. I would agree with that.
I don't have anything to add.
Yes, well, it's been very comprehensive, and hopefully this episode has been that for you while you've been listening or watching us. Thank you very much for being part of conversation. You can contact me on anything we've spoken about at joel@shockabsorber.com.au, or you can check out the shockabsorber.com.au website to join the network. But we might continue next episode talking about how this looks practically. We've talked about some people call the intangibles maybe, but I think they're very important intangibles. But then how do we do that on the ground is what we can talk about next week.
The tangibles.
The tangibles, yes, exactly. We've got an intangible episode and a tangible episode.
Yeah, sounds like a 70s pop band.
It does, doesn't
The
it?
tangibles.
Or a crime fighting group.
Oh.
Yeah.
The new Avengers.
The new tangibles. Anyway, thank you, Tim. Thank you, Stu.
Thank you, Joel.
Always a pleasure to have you on. And we always like to finish with a one way.
One way.